rest of our council members here as well. We're gonna go on and get started with our meeting on today regarding the Gafers project. I believe today we have the developers here. So if the developers could come forth, kind of do this mini presentation, and then our committee members will have an opportunity to ask any questions as well as our council members that's here today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks very much for allowing us to speak with you. I will spend just a minute talking about Gulf Coast Housing Partnership. We are an affordable housing developer. We're located in New Orleans. We operate across the Gulf Coast, and we are currently in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. While we lead with affordable housing, and affordable housing to us means both special needs housing, mixed income housing, we just simply don't do straight market rent rental. We lead with affordable housing or some variation of it, and then we follow with commercial. So since our 2006 birth after Katrina, in January of 2006, where we had 1 employee, myself, we now have 100 positions, of which 92 are filled. We have developed over 4,000 units across the region, and we manage 1,900. And most of our folks earn less than 60% of area median income. Gafers building we bought when it came on the market, I believe it was mid-2015. The prior owner had tried to make it market rate condominiums, unsuccessfully gave up, put it on the market. We saw the opportunity for what it was, a great location for affordable housing in downtown Mobile, in an area that was really coming back to life. There are many, many people that work downtown that make very low wages. Downtown Development Alliance shared with us a market study that they have commissioned that is hot off the presses. That says there, I believe, over close to 4,000 people, okay, that make less than $30,000 a year that work downtown and within 20 minutes walking distance to their jobs. Gafers building, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. We are very committed to affordable housing, and we work very, very hard and very long to bring this project to fruition, and we sure hope we get your support. Tom, you want to talk about the venture?
Yeah, I'm Tom Champion. I'm our Senior Vice President over our real estate development group. So the Gafers building, everybody's familiar with it. Historic rehabilitation, adaptive reuse. Basically, our plans are to rehabilitate roughly the little over 100,000 square feet that are there. We're also adding about 14,000 square feet on the top that will be distinct from the historic integrity of the building. So it'll be about 114,000 square feet total. Within that, we've got 72 one-bedroom apartments, 21 two-bedroom apartments, and there are a couple of three-bedroom apartments for a total of 95 units. Amenities, we'll have a fitness center, we'll have a few different rooftop patios, community gathering space, outdoor areas. On the ground level, we'll have both covered and surface parking. I think we've got 23, I believe, covered parking places and 18 uncovered parking places. Every unit will have washers and dryers. We will have an on-site leasing and management office, so we will have people, maintenance and management people on site. We'll do some things like package locker systems. We're doing those in our developments now. That's become, e-commerce has been so big. We'll be building to energy efficiency, Energy Star standards, enterprise green standards. Will also be controlled access for entry and exit of the building for security purposes. Let's see. Basically, the rents will be restricted, and we'll have everybody there will be at or below 60% of the area median income on their earnings. We'll have 19-50% units and 76-60% units, but everybody will be under 60% of the area median income. And projected rents, which is the big piece. We're projecting one bedrooms at $647, two bedrooms at $769, three bedrooms at $881. If you're familiar with the market rate developments, call it roughly half of the new market rate developments for the same standard, we trust of, or better, of construction, amenities, units. As I've always said, our expectation is that no one on the street will know this isn't a high-end market rate development. It'll just be a question of who can live there in the development. I think those are the basics, so with that.
Thank you, Tom. Committee members, have any questions?
I see that representatives from the Downtown Alliance, I think that just reading some media reports that you all were or are in favor of this development.
Yeah, I think we see a tremendous need for affordable housing downtown. We built 500 market rate units in the past 5 or 6 years, and there's been no new affordable housing. And we know so many of the people who work downtown would qualify to live there, and it just seems that forcing those people to live outside of the area where they work is just not the best way to provide good workforce for our downtown businesses who rely on them.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question in response to that, because I've been approached by some business owners who are in the restaurant industry, and they say that their workers would not qualify for that housing. So what are the exact, not percentage, but what are the exact salary qualifications to be able to rent in that facility?
And it does depend upon households. Excuse me. It does depend upon household size. Can I circulate this? But basically, in Mobile, it's done by municipality, and the federal government is the one that issues this information, and it is updated annually. So if wages are going up, your AMI is going to go up. But for right now, for say a two-person, 60% AMI would be about just under $32,000 a year. That would be the income. Okay,
But what about that single employee who's making $15 an hour that's working downtown?
Mhm.
I mean, they're gonna be less than $30,000 a year.
If they're working $15 an hour, 40 hours a week, and we typically find that that's not what's happening.
$15 an hour at 2080 is $32,500 a year. At 60% AMI, it comes out to be $24,000 a year take home, which is about $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month equates to a $600 to $800 month rent, with about $1,200 remaining on additional expenditures is where they're going with those numbers. So it fits the $15 an hour guide, I think is what they're trying to say when it comes to the AMI rating. The numbers actually work.
What, I heard earlier there was a base salary that you had to qualify that was above that 30,000 to move in there.
No.
But what's the minimum salary?
It's going to be a function of your rent. So you have to prove that you would have to, anybody who qualifies to rent an apartment has to go through a credit and a criminal check. So based upon what you disclose as your income, okay, that's going to either your income supports the rent or it doesn't. It really is that simple.
And those are maximum incomes,
Correct.
they're not minimum incomes. You have to make below that amount to live there. Now, you still have to qualify and be able to pay your rent and those types of things based on the rent level, but it's a maximum income that you can have to live there.
Thank you.
I have a question, just for clarity. If you all later would sell the building, sell the development, what would happen to the $8 billion?
Oh, what's going to happen is the city would loan the money to the venture. There'll be a mortgage on the building. When the building is sold or recapitalized, the mortgage would be repaid. But in full disclosure, we wouldn't encumber the building for a long time.
So our goal is not to flip it. Our goal is to keep it affordable for at least 35 years.
Have y'all ever sold any buildings under 35 years?
No, sir.
Would you explain,
Can I
repayment?
take that back with one exception? We purchased 2 buildings from a public housing authority in Fort Worth, and they asked us to sell them back to them because they were in trouble with HUD because they didn't have enough of their RAD tenants housed. So we did that. We did sell them back.
Mr. Karen?
No, she just answered the first one, because I've kind of asked all of these questions. Please explain the repayment of the $8 million to the council, because it's not what you would see conventionally. The $8 million payment is based on cash flow. So if they have a bad year with 0 return, the city gets nothing. So if they have a good year, then the city might get something. It's not like we get a payment annually that we can count on. The other thing is that over 35 years, we may not ever see our $8 million again. So, I mean, that's just the long and short of the truth. The other thing is that it was just so much, I can't even articulate it right now, but if you just explain to them so that they truly have, it's truly transparent, that repayment of that loan isn't a guaranteed amount every year.
Certainly, okay, but I think if you go to any community, this is how these deals are done. Okay, what happens is, when you are income restricting who can live there, right? Those folks, you are limiting the rental income you can generate from that asset. That rental income is there to cover the operating expenses, of course, you know, insurance, maintenance, et cetera. And then, though, what you hope for is that there is cash after you pay your expenses. That cash is what we take to the bank and borrow money conventionally. Because we're restricting the rents, we don't end up with a lot of money that we can go to our friendly neighborhood lender and borrow millions of dollars. It doesn't work that way. We're constrained on what we can borrow conventionally. So we look for buildings just like the Gafers because we're trying to generate equity from tax credits, historic tax credits, low-income tax credits. We're building an equity stack. For accounting reasons, money that's coming from the federal government through our cities and other communities has to be loaned into the ventures. So what all communities do, and I can give you many, many examples, is it's called a capital stack. And you layer in the money. Your perm debt, your first mortgage, they get the cash, right? Then your next step is your second, third, fourth, fifth. In some cases, we have 14 layers of financing on a transaction. And they are cash flow notes. Every year, the project is audited. The auditor determines whether or not there was surplus cash or deficit. And then the city would get a portion of that cash flow depending upon what was negotiated. If the cash is not paid, it accrues. It doesn't disappear. So if in fact the building is sold or refinanced, then what's due to the city is both the primary principal plus the accrued interest.
The second thing to consider is if they go into a position where they have to refi or something like that, or they go to another loan application, then they don't want to pay the city back, is they turn around and they ask the municipality to reinvest the same $8 million back into the project again. So it's not like we're seeing that money.
Well, that's possible, but it's also possible that you would see it. Okay, I cannot predict to you what will happen over the next 35 years, other than you will have folks housed there that make lesser incomes in downtown Mobile.
I have a question. I know you were talking about purchasing the building. When did y'all purchase it? I can't remember.
In 2015.
Oh, in 15 y'all purchased it. So it's been a while, but do you normally buy buildings that are already standing, or do you build from scratch?
Both. We do both new construction, we buy dirt, we'll buy historic buildings, and yes, you know, many of the things we do take a long time, right? But
Yes, it's
we
good.
keep trying until we get the right mix.
But you do some ground up as well
Absolutely.
as.
Just finished
buy.
120 units, right across the street from Minute Maid Stadium in downtown Houston. New construction, ground up. And they're putting 120,000 a unit, they did, into that venture.
Familiar with it?
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Hey,
I've heard-
Congress Greg, Member Greg, right there.
And so, I think I'm hearing you right, a lot of the attraction for this particular building is because you can layer some of the dollars, you can get more grants, tax credits, that sort of thing, that you couldn't get on, say, a ground up or some building, say, in Westmobile that you wanted to renovate? Would it be different because?
It's possible, you can certainly do it other places, but you have to have financial attributes, or you have to say, well, instead of 86,000 a unit, I think is what we're looking for on this, we need a couple 100,000 a unit. And that is not, believe me, folks, I know these sound like very big numbers, but they're just not.
I guess every case is a little bit
Correct.
different. Hey, I know the city's got this $8 million that we were looking at, and we had, when we first started looking at this, CJ and Joel, we had really thought that the better place to spend the money was in the neighborhood policing because that's really how we had intended it. So, without the $8 million, are you all still able to do what you want to do?
Not exactly what we have in front of you today, we'll have to go back to the drawing board.
Councilmember Jones?
Yeah, we've got 8 million that you're proposing put in. I think if I remember right, it was 11 million put in from federal housing dollars, is that correct?
No, 8 million is the only federal money. The rest of it, the way tax credits work, tax credits are generated from a transaction, and investors invest in the transaction to get the tax credits. So that's equity.
Yeah, those are not federal dollars.
They're not federal
They're
dollars, it's private equity.
Private investors.
So,
Banks buy them, lots of corporate investors buy the equity.
Hold on, Mr. Cap. Jones, you done.
Well, so there's no federal regulations that's overseeing this on top of the $8 million ARPA funds.
There's federal regulations involved with who lives in the building. The low-income housing tax credit has strings attached to it. The
Which is how
historic
much?
tax credit is 60% AMI.
That's, so 60% of your overall funding is coming from federal tax credits.
No. Low-income housing tax credits have strings attached to them, just like the ARP funds have strings attached to them. The low-income housing tax credit restricts the income of the resident. It restricts the rent you can charge the resident. That's it.
I know you had other sources coming, I was thinking that those tax credits were still tied to federal dollars that were being promised.
No, sir. It's private dollars, and the
I
private
think your
investors.
question may be, of the 32 million, 8 million
8 million
city,
is federal.
and then,
The rest of it is private equity and a loan from the Mobile Housing Board.
so the tax credits are private?
Yes, sir.
And highly regulated too. I think I heard you ask that Alabama Housing Finance Authority, this is an IRS thing. I mean, they are inspected every year, regulated every year. They look at your financial statements, make sure you're doing it.
Are you trying to do a 4% or 9%?
This is a 4% transaction.
So 4%?
Yes.
4%. Wow, oh. That really hurts. There's some distance problems there, I think.
explain what are you talking about?
I'm talking about future development now. Are you guys in a qualified census tract?
Oh, coincidentally, we were, until when did they change it? just
2022,
changed it.
it fell out of qualified.
So it was a
census tract.
qualified census tract last year.
So it's not in the qualified census tract for the ARPA funds that we're using?
I'm not sure what the
We
designations are.
submitted our applications for bonds and tax credits by the end of last year. So under that QAP, so for this development, it's considered a qualified census tract because of when we submitted our applications. If we were to resubmit an application today, we would not have those benefits. That benefit is additional tax credit dollars.
So, based on when the ARPA funding was given to the city, were you in a qualified census tract at that point? Because I think what I read was you were qualified before ARPA came up. ARPA redefined the census tracts that you would qualify for. So how can you qualify for one based on the application for another?
Because it's
That's
affordable
a
housing.
city
Yeah, I
question.
can speak to that, this is just very interesting for the city. So, a couple different things. It was qualified when the ARPA funds were approved by city council. It was QCT is not a requirement for housing in ARPA. Affordable housing in itself is a standalone project, tax eligible.
If not being qualified for QCT, I understand that you can still give the money to them, but does that not sometimes or most times slow down the payment of ARPA funds from the U.S. Treasury Department?
No, they deposited half the funds in the city's accounts pre-grant,
But it could affect
pre-expenditure.
other payments from the Treasury Department because we chose to do something that was outside the census.
No, not whatsoever.
That's not, I've got a letter from them that I'm gonna send to you later today.
But being in the QCT is not required for affordable
Yeah.
housing at all.
Yeah, but I understand, they actually, their statement was, is that it does not disqualify you, but it could affect the payment or the rate of payment.
That's not true. Because they're depositing a lump sum. We actually should have gotten a second tranche by now.
Yeah, I'd like to see
It's
that.
coming, it's coming, it's coming.
It's covered, I like to see that.
So, and since we touched
And then,
on that,
but even that being said, the downtown census tract has totally changed from 2015 to 2022. I mean, downtown in that block is extremely developed.
Right.
And it's not undeveloped. And the developments around them are highly developed. They're almost luxurious. So, I mean, I'm a staunch believer in mixed-use developments. I say that a neighborhood cannot be complete unless it has low to moderate income living, affordable living, market rate living, tax credit, and luxury all together so that each person can draft off each other. But does it make sense for this property at this point in time to be placed right here where it is?
so.
Hey,
two
before you go,
things. Yeah, go.
we ask the audience to minimize that conversation. We'll record the video, so again, some people, can't hear. You can go. Thank you.
A few things. Let me take a step back and go back to the legislative intent of the ARPA funds in general. First was, and it's coming from the, response to COVID, local fund from the U.S. Treasury. The first level of response was closing the city budget gap. We weren't eligible for that because the city actually did pretty well during the coronavirus. We had surplus. So that wasn't an eligible option. Second level of response is those at risk of contracting the virus and those affected, which is healthcare employees, teachers, restaurant, hotel workers, government employees, including first responders and tourism industry. After that, it was others that are more high risk due to economic social status, which is low to moderate income, senior, disabled, those categories. Towards the end, right before the funding actually got here in place, there was an executive order that came out looking at racial disparities. That's a fourth category, but it's below the other three because we can't look at race as a determining factor in most things we do. Fair housing kicks in if you're trying to do that. So that's just the general background on the purpose of the funds just as a whole. As far as your question of the location of the project itself, the Fair Housing Equal Opportunity Office actually dictates this is the type of project they'd like to see. We have a very high income, somewhat high income area compared to your lower income areas. Going in there and preserving what you can on affordable housing so that people have a choice to move in there. It's not gonna dictate they go there, whoever they are, but they have a choice to go there when they couldn't otherwise go there. And as far as the distance to other projects, that's a 4% tax credit state issue, potentially. The units in this would very, very likely be done and occupied, rented up prior to another 4% being within 2
Well,
miles of it.
you're still within 18 months is what they said. But for those people at the table that don't understand this type of financing is that no other 4% tax credit project can start until this building is complete, fully occupied within 2 miles of it.
Right, and
Within 2 miles of it.
currently we
Which
have-
means that the bottom, the campground, lower MLK, if there was any development over there that had a 4% tax credit, would be put on hold until this building was finished. In my mind, $8 million would be better served in that community than right there in Gateford. In Gateford's on
And I'm not saying they're mutually
So what this
exclusive.
building's gonna do is once that money's given, it's gonna stop anything within 2 miles of it. It's gonna hold it up.
That's going through a tax credit
That's
process,
right.
not a finance by the
But
city
we don't
process.
know what developers are out there looking at the opportunity to do a whole lot more in a residential neighborhood with money that's helping larger families. You gotta remember that this building has mostly one 4-bedroom apartments in two, which are not family conducive. They only have two or three 3-bedroom apartments. So the ideal here is to help families. I know that we want to help our workforce. I know we want to. I want to do that, and I'm not against the project. I've told y'all before, it's actually a good project. But for $8 million, we can do a whole lot more in areas that truly need it.
What I'll say to that is, we did an RFP last year, and we've gotten no responses for that area. We're perfectly willing to look at anything that's coming through for that area, but we don't have anything.
Well,
For
the reason
federal
why
funds
we
to be
don't-
used, we have to have a proposal, a qualified developer, and a project.
The reason why we don't have anything, let me give you a prime example. We had projects in Africatown that sat there for years where we didn't clear the title. Africatown couldn't even start the development and redevelopment on projects that it had because the titles wasn't clear, because they sat in somebody's office too long. The reason why we don't have shovel-ready projects is because we don't have a department creating the shovel-ready apartments. The city does not have skin in the game to do these types of developments.
Let me see, Woods here.
So
Here's the mic.
So to the point that we're talking about dealing with another 4%, it's very competitive. This is the only one we have, and because of the timelines, you either use this one now or you don't get it. And then I think everybody gets that, but I want to say it for clarity. But as far as the 4% is concerned, that 2-mile radius, we've actually looked in those areas, as Jamie alluded to. So what we did was, this was not our first choice as the administration. This wasn't our first choice. So we actually looked at the areas we're talking about. And it's not a both, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So we actually offered this out, put an RFP out, asking for developers to come in and look at these areas. And this is part of us putting, and I think Mr. Carroll's right, we have to have skin in the game, but we have to have some start somewhere. And so this $8 million gets the Gayfors building out of plight. It meets all of the categories. We have site control. We have a developer ready and willing and able to get in here and do it. The problem is, and we're willing to work towards it, and we're going to work towards it. We just got ARC, the African Redevelopment Corporation, just got off the ground, right? Just got off the ground. They're moving. They're moving. Those titles are going to be clear. That is something that we're working on. And yet, sure, they sat too long. That was not our fault. All right, that was beforehand. So we're working through that process, and even considering it's not a bad idea to ask for developers to go into these other areas for infill, but it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, the $8 million, what else are we going to do with it? That's the whole point, is what else are we going to do with it? And there's no other affordable housing in the downtown area. It's downtown Mobile, Alonzo City. There's no other affordable housing in the area. So if it's not this, then there's no other building that we have site control over. And there's no other developer that we have coming in. We got plenty of market rate. And that is hats off to the previous council and the administration working towards those developments. It's hats off to everybody who contributed. We're still gonna go forward with other market rate projects. That's gonna continue to happen. So to the extent we're moving as quickly as possible with the 4%, 2-mile radius for the entire scope of Mobile, that's not a large area. But remember, when this council was putting into action, when you're putting into action these ARPA funds, $29 million total, none of maybe $100,000 has been spent, $29 million total. Your focus, the previous council's focus, and some members here, was east of I-65. East of I-65. So what we did was, we took that model and we went and looked at all of the areas. There are other areas we're concentrating on. There's Maines. We're looking at, we started that before we did this. We're looking at 2 other projects, 2 other developments. But this is the one that's here now for downtown, and I don't know of another one. If somebody could give us another building where we have site control, we can remove blight, and we have a ready active developer, then we'll look at that too.
Let me just say one sentence. To say that the 2-mile radius is a very small area, that's kind of cruel, because the 2-mile radius is right where we need to be in the city. 2 miles is the campground, the bottom, those are places that have not been considered in 40 years. Show me a development other than the ones that the housing board did back in 2016 that were right there on Monday Street in those areas, so they're not a housing board. But show me a new development over there other than Michael Pierce and those few houses that were done from 1999 to 2000, what was it, 15?
Yeah.
Show me that. But the 2 miles is right where we need to be with the largest impact on families that are either below the poverty line or average or affordable. I've got a video of a guy named Charles, lives on Basil Street, that I need to send everybody in here. I might just say it probably. But Charles lives in a house, he's paying $350 a month. He was in Orange Grove, but now his roof is caving in, it's raining in him on rain days. The rodents live in the house with him, the back door is open, but it's the only place he has to live. And living in a facility like this does not help him or his family. Doesn't help him. It's a good project. It's a good project. But is it the right time and place for it? $8 million would be better spent in areas that are now economically deprived, been economically deprived, and are still there.
Okay, Councilman Dave been waiting patiently. Okay.
I just have a few questions. There are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. What are the square footage of each of those?
They run from 600 to just under 1,000. Around 600.
It was, I think it was 580, 590 to 650. I mean, 850 is what I'm talking about. The 3-bedroom
I
apartment.
think those 3 bedrooms may be a little more, because they're pushing around.
Okay.
Now, but look,
Hold on, Councilman Davis.
also look into this, I'm sorry.
Well, we appreciate it, thank you, Mr. Carroll.
They're
Councilman
similar,
Davis, have the
similar
floor.
size to some of the
Well,
apartments.
Ms. Carroll, Councilman Davis, have the floor.
yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, one of the major things I'm interested in with respect to this project, well, first of all, let me do this. The total cost of the project is what?
32 million.
32 million. And the city's putting in, if we do it, 8 million. So that takes you down to what, 24 million?
Correct.
Okay, where's the rest of the 24 million coming from?
A little over 11 million is equity from the low-income housing tax credits. Historic tax credit equity brings another $6 million. $1 million from the Louisville Housing Board, and then GCHP, we're advancing 1.9 million.
So y'all are putting into it is 2 million, right?
Correct. Oh, and then conventional debt, perm loan, 4.2 million. That's the capital.
What was that last? 4.2 million additional loan.
First mortgage.
One of the main things I'm interested in is the maintenance and upkeep of the facility. If the project goes through, because, you know, it's taken us a long time to get downtown Mobile back to where it is today. I can remember 40 years ago when it was not what it is today. And so what we want is a project that is gonna look good when it's finished and look good 20 years from when it's finished. So talk to me some about the maintenance and upkeep and how that's gonna be handled.
Sure. Well, we will be the managers, GCHP management, will be the managing company, but regardless, and what Tom had mentioned earlier, I think people need to understand, this is private money going into the deal, okay? And those investors want the building maintained just like you do, okay? And so what, in terms of the underwriting process, we're required to provide them with a 15-year schedule of operations that demonstrates that the building will cover all the operating expenses you can imagine, right? Insurance being the most expensive line item, maintenance, elevator contracts, et cetera. Okay, so they vet that. What do we use to come up with those budgets? A couple of things. We use market studies. We use our other comps, right? And because we know what it costs, we're managing a couple thousand units, and we built 4,000. So we pretty much know
what it's gonna cost to operate them, and that's how we build our budgets. And that's why we end up with the capital stacks we do, because we can't shortchange the operations. If we did, very easy to inflate the debt, right? Okay, we can't do that. We don't want to do that, because when we take expense hits, if insurance goes up 25% because there's a hurricane in the Gulf, we can't raise rents 25%, right? We are stuck with the rents the federal government says we can charge. So it behooves us to be very conservative in our underwriting. It's what our investors expect from us. And I think if you look at the history of our ventures there, I would be stunned if you drove by any one of them. They look like any other venture.
Okay, you said of the 4,000 units you all have created, how many of those units are you still managing?
We managed 1,900 units. Yeah, some of those 4,000 we did in partnerships where other folks ended up with the asset. Some of them we negotiated from the get-go, they wanted to be the property manager, right? But in terms of what we manage, it's 1,900. And we do some third-party management.
I think earlier you said that, I thought what you had said was that of all the projects you've initiated, you've only sold one, or at least one out in Texas.
That was in Fort Worth, Texas.
Fort Worth, Texas.
Right.
So,
No,
so
but what I mean by that is, if we go into a venture, typically you're gonna have ourselves, and if we have a partner, right? And if the partner wants to be the ownership entity, okay, what we're gonna do, as long as we have our money at risk, we're in control. We wanna make sure the project gets done according to what everybody was promised, okay? But if the deal from the beginning was that they wanted to own the asset, then we negotiate with our investors. So once our financial risk is removed, okay, then our control goes away. We may stay as a member in the entity, we make it out. The asset doesn't flip, right? It's just who actually is in control changes.
all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, hold up, Ms. Cowan. Councilmember Gregory.
This question is more for Jamie, I think. With this ARPA money, Jamie, kind of going into what Williams was talking about, going into neighborhoods, is the money usable if you've already identified blighted properties to go in and clear those properties? Also usable for repairs, whether it's capital improvements outside the house, roofing, that sort of thing? And would it also be possible, if there is land available, to build apartments, duplexes, that kind of thing? Something that I've got a real concern about in my district is senior apartments that we have none of and need badly. I mean, if something like that would be possible with the money, with that $8 million, but of course the other concern is making sure that we have these shovel-ready projects and do it on time and make sure that we don't lose the money. So we don't want to lose $8 million if it's coming to us. We'd like to be able to use it.
So the short answer, yes, those are all eligible items. The longer answer is, to the extent you have capacity, to get through environmental review. So there's definite capacity issues we would have if we took $29 million and went to rehabbing everybody's houses. Don't have that many small contractors that can go do that on an individual basis, especially with the state requiring home builders to have a license. And if you do a roof, you have to have a special roof home builder's license, specifically for roofs now, triggered in about 2 years ago. Environmental reviews is probably the biggest issue we have on undeveloped property in the city because of the proximity to the bay, proximity to water. Potential contaminants. Roger Williams is a project that developer had an option on for 4 years, couldn't get through the state tax credit system because it has an environmental contamination on it. And it's 70% of the floodplain. So that one, we fully backed, way back when, trying to get a 9% tax credit. Couldn't get it to go, that option's no longer on that property, so it's clear to be redeveloped, but it's still got the contamination. ADEM has monitored wells on it to monitor for arsenic and chromium-6. The further you head out west, the raw land's easier to develop because you get further away from water. So that's the longer version of it.
It's also the question, for so many neighborhoods, we've got a lot of blighted properties that are just sitting there, still blighted. Would it be possible to use the money to speed up the process, in order to get those properties down, in order to build something new, if that was what the need was?
Not likely because we wouldn't have site control. We could go under state law and do public nuisance,
Yeah.
eligible, but you can't use that funding unless you rebuild with affordable housing right behind. If you don't have site control, you can't do that. Taking out,
Site control,
We have to own it.
ownership.
He's talking about
Yeah.
Own and
Well,
control.
that's what I was
We-
trying
we
to
could
get to,
have-
is can you go in and clear the titles?
Right.
just
We,
like
we,
clear
we,
the titles?
we can do that. The thing is we haven't been doing that. I went back and checked, I think we have maybe 22 pieces left, something like that, or less than that now, that work in the land bank.
We've got about
Actually acquire
55
anything.
properties on that way.
Right.
We have about 55 properties.
55, no, okay, I thought it was less than
It's
that.
about 25 or so clear title.
Right, that's what when I went back and checked. But we haven't been clearing title in a while, maybe since Kerry May.
It may be that, I can help clarify that. So the system was based on an on-demand developer request system, and we've changed that in the last year and a half. So as the city acquired a tax deed, the developer would need to be interested for us to process it to clear title. We've changed that in the last year and a half, like I said, to, we're going after strategic acquisitions on tax deeds and foreclosing liens to get them ready for a developer to come in and go ahead and have it cleared off. So we're clearing title in advance of developer interest now, so that's changed recently.
To, goes to, Councilman Gregory. Remember, point is, it's possible for us to do that.
Yeah, it's possible.
Possible, but not probable because of the time constraints and the site control issue. And then on top of that, we still have environmental reviews you have to follow through with federal court.
Okay, okay, what you done? Councilman?
It wouldn't be $8 million worth, likely. It'd be $1 million, $2 million, which is already budgeted separate from this $8 million.
All right, we got Councilman Reynolds, he's been waiting patiently as well.
All right. So the 32 million bucks. Y'all have plans for this?
Almost, we're still negotiating with the National Park Service, just about through Part 2 amendments. We are going for historic tax credits, which means we have to go through your state historic preservation office and the National Park Service. They've done their initial review, we've had some amendments, and I believe we're almost getting to the finish line in terms of the actual submission for the Part 2.
And
Final
we'll be-
amendments,
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll be going to the architectural review board. We were just trying to get far enough along in that process with National Park Service so that we knew what they would and what they wouldn't allow. But we're scheduled to go there. I don't know if it's scheduled yet, but yeah, we'll be going to the architectural review board here soon. And then obviously through the permitting process as soon as we have final plan.
So this 32 million bucks, where did that number come from?
Cost estimate, we have a construction department as well as a plethora of data.
And what was that estimate?
No, we revise it rather frequently.
Yeah, it's very recent.
Let's just say, in the event this project costs $40 million, then what?
You have to raise more money, but if it costs $40 million, that means the value of the credits go up. But the historic tax credits are very valuable, okay, meaning that they're covering a percentage of the cost. So as the cost goes up, the value of the credits goes up. The same with the low-income housing tax credit. As the basis increases, you generate more equity.
All right,
That would cover
so,
part of it.
Yeah.
so in the event that this project does cost more $40 million or so, the city of Mobile's already invested its $8 million, so now we're either partnering in making sure you can get the project done.
No, sir, because we can't close. Okay, we would take your commitment, we're gonna have somebody who's willing to purchase the historic tax credits. It may or may not be the same entity that's purchasing the state. It may or may not be the same lender. Okay, so everything has to close on the same day. So we're not in a situation where we're asking you for your money and then you're gonna hope that we perform. Okay?
I understand this was a construction loan.
We only pay on a reimbursement
Yeah,
basis.
it's a reimbursement.
So it'd
We
be
have to
essentially an
incur
$8 million
expense.
line of credit close with all the other financing mechanisms
Right.
for that access as construction's already going on. It's construction
All right,
finance.
so explain that to me again now. You got $8 million that we're going to basically promise to this project. All right.
Well, when we get to the closing table, the investors and the bank wants to see $32,200,000. That's their expectation. If we don't have that, we don't close. It's that simple. So we're not asking you to front the money in hopes that you're gonna get this venture.
And when by you mean closing table, you mean prior to the project being started, right?
Correct.
Closing on
We get the
conventional
building
loans,
permit,
the
that's
tax
exactly
credit
right.
transfers,
That's right,
and the $8 million
Correct.
The
from
financial closing.
That's
The
correct.
financial closing.
And we
That's
can't
correct.
start.
And I may have called it construction loan, it's construction access to capital.
All right, but my question
Functions more or less.
is that you're not gonna know this thing costs $40 million until you get into it,
Well, we're
in
gonna-
the event.
we will know it before we get to the closing table. We're gonna know it before we ask you for your $8 million. We can't close without a construction contract, without a bond, without all the things that any prudent investor would wanna see.
And our investors will do plan and cost reviews to make sure that our construction contract makes sense for the amount of money, and it can be built for that. They'll review our GCs and their subs, and you have to gotta go through an entire process so that all of the investors, lenders, banks, Fannie Mae, Chase Bank, whoever's doing the perm loan, that they are comfortable that you have a deal that can be closed, can be built, for the price that you committed to building it for based on your construction contracts, which are fixed price contracts.
What he's saying is that he has a contractor that's doing the pre-construction services, that's providing every estimate for the cost of construction they need. They're not just doing it based on when they've got a program manager that's taking them through the whole programming phase of design, and then involving the contractor while they're designing it to tell them exactly what it's gonna cost at the end, so that they have all those in place.
That's like, when Alabama Housing Finance Authority is involved, these are by far the most strict underwritten projects we are involved in. And so we go along with it. Whatever they say is what we follow with, and we can actually copy their documents. They're overly underwritten.
All right, still, more, that's just one. This building's wide, is it wide open inside of it? Or are there
Pretty much.
partitions in there?
Well, most of the demo's been done inside, it's been remediated in terms of any environmental conditions. The only thing that really has to go right now, I think we're moving a few walls, but not many, and then the escalator. The escalator has to go.
It's a shell,
Yeah.
it's more or less of a shell, but there's still a few interior things. Right now, our big piece is we're doing all our structural investigations, which we have to finalize for the structure and the weight, the additional we're putting on top.
Okay, so this makeup of 72 one-bedrooms, 20 or so, 2 bedrooms, and 2 3-bedrooms, really could be something different if you chose.
No, we can't, because the National Park Service, we have a comprehensive plan. We have to send all the preliminary drawings to them, okay? And they approve everything. If we want a window here, they say you can or you can't do that. If we want a driveway here, they say, sorry, you can't do that. And we go back and forth. So we cannot now then come back and say, instead of 95 units, you're going to do 147. Can't do that. Okay, the investors will not close without Part 2 approval from the National Park Service. It's a piece of paper that has you check at the bottom, and we either comply or we don't. If we don't have that Part 2 approval, nobody's going to invest in the historic equity, because if chances are, National Park Service will come back and say, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And all they have to rely on is the approved plans and specs.
And because there's this application that was submitted while it was still a qualified area, you can't modify that application in any way.
That's independent. The qualified census tract discussion is an independent
Okay.
issue.
So you
The
could
building
resubmit.
design, no, sir. I mean, we could, let's pretend that's, I have no idea, for example, what the prior user who wanted to put condos in there. I know he wanted to use historic tax credits, right? But I don't know how he laid the building out. Maybe he had 40 units in there. But regardless, he has to get permission from SHPO and then the National Park Service. Okay? He gets a piece of paper once they've approved his design. If he wants to change the design, he has to go back to start. Or he has to, if it's an insignificant change, he can ask to have his Part 2 amended. If it's a significant change, then he has to go and start all over again.
Okay.
Mr. Woods, you
I was just trying to answer your question, but both of you guys.
I think I get it, but parking, all right. So how many occupants is this building gonna, how many people are gonna be occupying this building approximately? I'm sure you gotta know that for fire code, the max occupants.
I forget what I really don't know the max occupancy off the top of my head, but let's pretend it's 100 people. I don't know if everybody will, one person live in, what, or 110, I don't know.
And
Yeah,
then,
there's 41 spaces.
okay, so if there's 41 spaces, so I believe at the planning commission, when developers submit a plan to develop, they base the parking spots on max occupancy, is that right, man?
It's related to.
Related to that, okay, and so where does this fall with that? Is that within our purview? You may not have the answer.
Downtown is different.
Downtown's different. Okay, so it's common that our occupancy and our parking are gonna be out of whack.
And we're gonna have bike racks, and I'll just remind folks that those 4,000 people are currently walking to work.
You didn't have racks, parking racks?
Like,
I think.
I'm worried that we may be compounding our already significant parking issue that we have downtown.
We have a surplus of parking downtown.
No,
All right,
no, we don't.
all right, hold on. All right, Councilman Reynolds still have the floor, but he made a great point, and hopefully maybe y'all could answer that question is, of course, we know that some people are walking, but a lot of people do have vehicles. Where are they gonna park? Is it a solution for that? I think that's where you was going towards, if I'm wrong, Councilman.
Yeah, the number of rooms and
Yeah.
all that, you know.
Okay.
yeah.
So based on the numbers, most people might have a vehicle, where would they park?
So, that's why I asked about the layout, and floors being open, I don't know, the structural capacity to handle cars and put in ramps and all that sort of thing, but if there's a shortage of parking currently, is there an opportunity to modify the plan in some sort of way to accommodate additional parking? I'm afraid I don't want to compound an already inconvenient parking situation that's downtown, maybe not capacity wise, but certainly inconvenient to many, the way people have to park and walk. And then in 2015, Gulf Coast Housing Partnership purchased the building for how much?
just under $1.5 million.
This is noise requirements downtown. Just on the southwest corner of this building, there is a business, on the backside, that the Merry Widow and whatever the other operation is, Music Box. Now, they came in and took a building that was not in great shape. I think they put sizable investment to it, and now they are attracting entertainers from all sorts, shapes, and sizes. And it directly abuts the backside, and you can see windows there where they're no doubt going to be hearing music in those apartments. Is there any particular accommodation? Maybe the Downtown Alliance can help me with this, and I should know it, but what's the entertainment district noise requirement?
It is the same noise requirement as any residential district in the city. You cannot hear noise from its source more than 50 feet in the day and 25 feet at night. So if they're hearing noise from Music Box or the Merry Widow, they're in violation of the noise ordinance.
Yeah, and I know that enforcement is certainly an issue in that category. We have trouble, with measuring that. But when they invested with the understanding of how downtown works.
Yeah, they knew that.
They knew that's how the law operated, but it's really not enforced that much. So complaints are gonna come, right? They're gonna be coming from this building, which is gonna adversely affect them.
And we're, from that standpoint,
I guess if there's a buffer of some sort, but there's none on them that I know.
If we know up front if we know up front, like that this could be an issue, right?
Yeah.
Which we know.
It likely will.
We have developments next to interstates. We have developments in all sorts of different situations where noise is an issue. We're more than happy to do a noise study and actually include, soundproofing and all that sort of stuff if it's needed, if we're gonna be above, reasonable decibel levels and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we can work on that piece, again, knowing it could be an issue. And we build, there's all sorts of noise reducing things you can do with your insulation, your walls and everything else, and we can certainly take a look at that, and be able to build something in there knowing that this could be an issue.
This may be a question for Ricardo. On this money, what's here is just a reallocation of ARP money. We're moving money from this bucket to another bucket. How is this money executed to them? Is it through a memorandum of understanding? Or will there be a contract at some point that we see? And I want to make sure that if there are some sort of accommodations that are willing to be made by the contractor, that we're able to sort of see the plans, know what accommodations should be made or could be made before we hand over the keys.
Yeah, and it's through Treasury.
The Treasury regulations adopted the HUD home rules, which dictates all that, and we can add whatever additional local requirements in the contract. But you have to have a contract, mortgage, covenants, restrictions, and we check the title before we do all that, make sure they have clear title.
But as far as like a voluntary,
There's
buffer that's not required by HUD, not required by the city of Mobile, but in order to get the deal done, can they voluntarily,
They can, or if there's a
themselves?
reasonable thing you want to add to the agreement, we can add that before we
Yeah,
get to them.
that's doable. I want to see, I think,
We have a canned home agreement, but we can add additional local requirements.
I think Councilman Carroll made a really valid point earlier, is this is a good development, but is it the right time and the right place for it? And I think that decision is ultimately up to the council based on information. The question you really have to answer afterwards is, what else are you able to do with this 8 million in the time frame realistically? And we don't necessarily, based on all the confines, you don't know, because what Kathy was explaining, I think you asked a good question, Mr. Reynolds, is what's the alignment, what's the constraints on this? Well, it's both ends, it's a number of different things. So you've got the housing credits that they're dealing with, that's got timelines. Completely separate from that, you've got Treasury regulations at home and ARP that we're dealing with. Completely separate from that, they're dealing with parks and historic development. And all of these things have to align. And so what we really have to ask ourselves is, back to Mr. Carroll's question, is this the right development, the right time? Do you want to do this? And if you don't, because it's completely up to the council, if you don't, what else do you do in the alternative going forward, and what's possible based on the timelines that we're considering? And as to the 4% tax credit, we're looking to deal with this development, but that doesn't mean we don't do infill housing in the other areas. We just don't have $8 million worth. I think Jamie said this as much. We do have money set aside and budgeted for doing so, and we are in the process of working towards Africatown and moving towards, and we have made efforts to look at these other areas, but do we have another $8 million one in the hopper ready to go that is gonna create affordable housing? And the last thing is, there's a number of different emails that I know Mr. Carroll received, but I don't think that's shaded this conversation any, so I appreciate the council giving it due consideration.
All right, I got one, we got two fairly simple, they're for the developers, so I appreciate y'all taking the time with us today. All right, so it deals with maintenance schedule on rent cap, housing where your margins are thin all the time, and then say there is a 20% increase in insurance. I mean, do you have to forego paying the building one term?
First thing we have to forego is our management fee, okay? Because that's the way the deal's written, okay? And so there is a litany, just like we will enter into a loan agreement with the city, we're entering into an agreement with each investor as to what their expectations are. And so, basically, long story short, they're relying on us, okay? And if you get in a really awful situation, okay, where for whatever reason you did a lousy job budgeting and you expected the loan to venture the money to keep it whole, okay? If you don't, you're in default, you're blacklisted from the agencies, and you can't win any more credits, which means we're out of business. So it is something we take very seriously. We build into our budgets, both replacement reserves, operating deficit reserves, and we are starting to build an insurance escrow reserves because we can anticipate what the insurance market's going to do after the next hurricane season. So we are prudent and conservative, and we build in We build in the opportunities for the market not to go in our direction.
So it would be important to me to know the protections that are there for this $8 million to not allow this building to be successful for 5 or 10 years and some market shift or change for whatever reason causes strain with your organization, which then turns the building back to what it is today. So, you're gonna have to do capital expenditures at some point with this.
And we budget every year, and every month. We are escrowing tax and insurances, and we're escrowing replacement reserves, every month. Okay, so that builds up. I'm not sure what AHFA does, but I know in other markets, every 5 years, we have to provide the state a replacement reserve analysis to make sure we're evidencing that we have enough capital available in a checking account to cover the obsolescence of all the maintenance items.
Yes, I'd be curious what you have to provide the state.
And it's
You
so much
mentioned the
per
state,
year.
you mentioned the park service and everyone else, but we're kicking in $8 million. What sort of guarantees are you gonna have to provide to the taxpayers of this city? That capital needs, repairs, maintenance, insurance, taxes, all of it
We have
is
to
covered.
provide completion guarantee
To the city of Mobile?
to our investors. Yes, I'm sure the city would expect a completion
We get a
guarantee.
copy of everything.
Everybody would expect a
And to
completion
the first
guarantee.
mortgage lender.
Correct, an operating deficit guarantee, and then where there's credits involved in the historic and the light tech, there's a credit guarantee.
We're not the first line. So,
The state
So
requires.
that's why those protections are even more so important.
Correct.
Okay, thank you all for answering
You're
my
welcome.
questions.
Councilman Rumsey?
Yes,
All right, Councilman Carroll.
just a few things I want you guys to consider. Again, the units are 600 to 900 square feet, right? It's roughly 95 of them. When you take the total cost of the building, you divide it by the units, you're looking at each unit, no, 300,000.
32 million?
You divide 32 million by 95, you're looking at $300,000 per unit. How many of us live in a house that's 600 or 900 square feet and it's $300,000? What you think about that? How many of us in this room live in a $300,000 house that's either 600 or 900 square feet? That's one thing to think about. The music box. I'm going to protect them this time with everything I got, because the reason why they moved is because I forced them out of one situation next to housing because of vibratory noise. I don't think, matter of fact, none of you in this room were here when that happened. It was the worst debacle with the entertainment district that we ever had. I almost couldn't get the entertainment district done because of the music box. And we're not gonna put them back in another situation where vibratory noise causes them to move or cause an unintended consequence to their business. Parking. I think I tried to send each of you an email that was sent to me this morning about parking. There are roughly 23 spaces underneath and 13 outside, am I right? Is it
18.
18 outside or 18 underneath and
41 total.
41 total parking spaces. Now, all you know that I'm a builder. You know that I do commercial buildings. You know that we know the rules about parking. But just think about this. On average, there are gonna be 2 people in here per unit. We're talking about 195 people with 43 parking spaces. 43 parking spaces. Now, not to say that they can't walk a block or two, or that a lot of people living in here will be walkers that walk to work, walk back and forth, and walk back town and back around downtown, and actually is a walking, bikeable community. We don't know what that ratio is, but in the city of Mobile, we haven't evolved to the point to where we have a total walkable community. We're not there yet. We have some people downtown that do it, and we have sometimes people downtown that don't. But the majority of the people, 89% of them, all have cars. So it doesn't meet the parking, it doesn't meet the car. We're gonna create some type of crowd. We have to give additional consideration to that. Lastly, they keep talking about the park association. You guys that aren't aware of this, the park, when they're talking about the National Park Association, they're talking about historic preservation on this building. Windows
on the east side of this building somewhat control the cost. Because it's a historic building, the National Parks Association and the Historic Society will not let them change the windows. Therefore, the cost of construction, we're looking at $8 million windows is what we're looking at to bridge the gap. That's basically what we're looking at. $8 million in windows to bridge the gap. That's the controlling, that's the driver in this development. So is it the right time? Is it the right place? Those are the things that we have to consider. You know, I haven't made up my mind yet, but to be honest, if I could build a $300,000 house for somebody in the bottom and give it away, then I would do it. I could build a $300,000 quadruplex, have granite countertops, carpet, and we just showed up having a good time in affordable housing. So those are things that we have to talk about. It's a great project. It's a great project. And if out of the $111 million that we just gave away, or that we gave away $5 million a day to the county.
Invested.
I'm sorry. Great. Invested $5 million to the county. We're investing another, $11.5 million to other city projects, and we still have $70 or $80 million. We can take another road other than ARPA funding if we really want to do this project.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Any other comments from the council members here? Administration? No. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming out today. Call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Board.
It didn't go worse.